As you've gathered by now, if you want to lose weight, you're going to want to have more calories out than in. And if you want to gain weight, for instance, if you've started working out and you'd like to put on some mass, you'll be aiming for the opposite. You might be wondering, is it that simple? What about those foods and magazines and on TV that are supposed to help you blast fat? Well, as you may have guessed, most of that is nonsense, but there's some ways diet composition can affect your calorie intake. Some foods are more satiating than others, and that can definitely be a factor. Avocados, for instance, have a lot of fiber and form a lot of bulk in your gut. Therefore, they tend to make you feel more full faster, especially if you take them in with adequate water to avoid constipation from that large bolus of fiber. Large quantities of meat can also be very satiating and can suppress appetite, especially when consumed in, for instance, the context of a ketogenic diet, which we can discuss another time. Coffee can suppress appetite, as can smoking, although I'd never recommend using smoking as a method of weight loss. Eating calories is more satiating than drinking calories. In other words, a piece of fruit or some jerky is typically a better choice of snack than a protein shake in most weight loss contexts. Another way of dealing with one's appetite is to make sure you always stay well hydrated when trying to lose weight. This is of great importance as it's surprisingly easy to mistake thirst for hunger. Not only that, but drinking lots of water can give a little bit of a stretch to your stomach and suggest to your brain that maybe you really don't need to eat so much. You could even time some hydration pre-meal to lean into this concept. Now, aside from these basic diet composition elements, there's some more psychological and lifestyle-related measures that you can take. Of these, the ones I'd like to emphasize first are sleep duration/quality and stress levels. So, sleep is huge for health, and it's big for hunger in society. Not sleeping enough, especially less than, say, 6 hours a night, is associated with an elevated risk of obesity. This is likely widely multifactorial, meaning there's a bunch of reasons why this is, but one avenue you may hear about is hormonal. Leptin, a primary satiety hormone, is affected by sleep. Sometimes it goes down, and other times it goes up, suggesting the development of leptin resistance. The opposing major hunger hormone, ghrelin, has also been shown to go up with sleep deprivation. It's not a consistent finding, but it makes sense. Just know that not everyone will experience this the exact same. So if sleep is important, how can we improve quality and duration? Well, we should start with what's called sleep hygiene. A lot of this is going to seem very self-explanatory, but I'll also tell you that it's a very common thing I have to counsel my patients on when they come in complaining of sleep issues. Try to have a consistent sleep schedule. Exercise, but not within an hour of sleep. Same thing with eating and drinking close to sleep. One thing a lot of people have issues with is screen time before bed. The blue light spectrum emitted from a lot of these has been shown to be especially potent at suppressing melatonin release. Consider pre-bedtime meditation to help you wind down and reduce stress. If you have issues with early morning awakenings, you may have to take an honest look at your moods and see if maybe you might be depressed, as that's also a somewhat textbook association. If you're having morning headaches, daytime sleepiness, despite seemingly adequate sleep duration, or you've been observed snoring or choking or gasping in your sleep, especially if you're obese, you may want to talk to your doctor about an obstructive sleep apnea evaluation. If you're an older man that's waking up multiple times a night to urinate, and that's keeping you from sleeping well, that could be BPH, a prostate issue that becomes increasingly common as men age. And you should maybe talk to your doctor about that as well. Condition yourself to think of and treat your bed as a sleep-specific environment. In other words, don't stay in bed if you're not tired. If you wake up and can't get back to sleep, or otherwise just have trouble sleeping, do some low-energy passive activity like reading or meditating until you're ready to fall asleep. Then get back in your bed. Next, we move on to stress levels. Now, stress is a fairly vague term. Are we talking about oxidative stress, perhaps like what's associated with obesity, or are we talking more like psychosocial stress? Yes. Obesity itself is associated with a constant low-grade systemic inflammation that messes up your metabolism. But before you ever get to that point, things like micronutrient deficiencies in the diet and the gradual march of accumulating abdominal white fat contributes to oxidative stress that can predispose you towards more obesity over time. A varied diet can help with the micronutrients, linked to chronometer in the description to help you evaluate your diet, and a caloric deficit alongside a consistent exercise regimen can help you reduce that abdominal fat. Psychosocial stress also plays a role. A Danish study found that low socioeconomic status was a strong predictor of obesity later in life, but that higher personal educational level attenuated this effect later on in life, by age 28 or so is what they found. Lower physical activity, higher computer time, family disharmony, and maladaptive coping mechanisms were thought to be contributors here. Some of this might also be mediated by stressors, making it harder to get adequate sleep, quality/duration. Chronic stress by multiple mechanisms may lead to higher cortisol levels, your body's endogenous corticosteroid, which can cause you to get fatter or stay fat over time. What can you do about stress levels? Honestly, some of these factors may be difficult to modify. If you're not making enough money, you're going to have to do wildly different things than if you're going through a divorce that's taken 4 years and is still ongoing. Most of the time, solutions in the realm of stress will be specific to your circumstances, but we can attempt to suggest some generalizable advice. For one, meditation is a good idea for keeping yourself centered and calming your mind. Practicing good sleep hygiene, as mentioned above, will help. Fostering a solid social support system in the form of strong relationships with friends and family will also be helpful in many situations. Let's move on to some other types of psychological tactics you can use here. Using bigger forks has actually been shown to influence your brain into thinking you're actually eating more and letting you feel full sooner. Using smaller plates can actually have a similar effect, although beware, as using bigger spoons actually has the opposite effect, so don't necessarily do that. You can also apply the idea of conditioning to food the same way we did with sleep earlier. If possible, designate your dinner table as the dedicated eating space. If you find yourself there for another reason, you may end up finding yourself hungry even though you recently ate. Accustoming yourself to eating in certain situations can help you both predict and avoid these situations. Another thing to consider is that some of you may be on medications that predispose you to weight gain or make weight loss more difficult. These include chronic corticosteroid use, like, for instance, prednisone, antidepressants, antipsychotics, some anti-seizure medications, insulin, some antihypertensives, over-the-counters you might be using like proton pump inhibitors and antihistamines, and more. Talk to your doctor about what you may or may not be able to do about these. Further, you might have underlying health problems that are making it harder to lose weight. These can include thyroid dysfunction, PCOS, menopause, post-pregnancy issues, Cushing's syndrome, alcohol dependence, more rare things like acromegaly, and more serious things like heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure. And in those cases, you may be holding on to a lot of fluid, and frankly, you probably have bigger problems. Once again, talk to your doctor if you suspect any of these might be an issue. With all that less important stuff out of the way, let's get to the straight meat and potatoes of the matter: caloric deficit. Eating in a caloric deficit is key to losing weight if that is your goal. A nutrition professor from Kansas State actually went on a Twinkie diet and lost 27 pounds to demonstrate this point, that it's how much you eat as opposed to what you eat that's the biggest determinant of weight loss and gain. Is that a healthy way to do it? No. Is that how any medical profession would recommend you do it, including me? Of course not. But could you? Technically yes, but please don't. How do we determine what our caloric needs are so we can eat less than that? There's a few different calorie calculators available, and they're a good starting point. Calculator.net has a calorie calculator that not only tells you your caloric needs based on weight, age, height, and exercise frequency, it also tells you exactly what kind of deficit will yield what rate of weight loss. The rule of thumb for short to medium-term weight loss that you can use is that for every 3,500 to 3,600 calories of deficit you create, you lose about 1 pound of weight. And that's where the calculator is getting its estimates of what the rate of weight loss would be. That works out to about a 500 calorie deficit per day to induce about a pound of weight loss each week. And this is a pretty reasonable rate of weight loss to aim for. Too much more and most people get too hungry to stick with it. too much less, and you might get frustrated with the time it's taking, especially since any underestimates of your intake on any given day might destroy the deficit you thought you had. It's important to note that your calorie requirement will fluctuate over time. As you progressively lose weight, the weight input on that calculator will obviously go down and your requirement will go down, meaning that your weight loss will slow. You'll need a progressively lower caloric intake to maintain the same deficit, or otherwise you'll have to increase your activity in step with that weight loss. If you'd like an app that factors this in for you, you can use the NIH's Body Weight Planner, which accounts for dynamic changes in metabolism as you lose weight. And it allows you to set a goal weight with a date you want to reach that by, which you absolutely should do, referring to, goal weight and setting a date as well, so that you're clear on where you're starting and where you want to go. Remember, your body will adapt as your weight changes because it's always striving for homeostasis. It's not generally a fan of change, even if you think, change is good. Okay, so now you've figured out how many calories you need, you figured out your goal weight, and you're ready to go. So how do you get where you're going? Well, it comes to mind that you should probably be able to keep track of how much you're actually eating. On a basic level, the answer here is calorie counting. Now, before you groan and flick off the video because that's not your speed, stick with me for a moment because we can make this manageable and more palatable, so to speak. One simple way of getting a jump start on calorie counting is with a program like Weight Watchers. What is their point system but a way of counting calories using single-digit numbers, and their delivered meal plans but a way of making you stick to your allotted calorie count? Seriously, that's all they're doing. They're just helping you count calories using smaller numbers for simple addition, and they're a billion-dollar company. Freaking brilliant business idea. That is, if you're willing or prefer to pay for that kind of structure. But you can really just do this yourself with even more precision at home. I'd suggest using an app like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer to keep track of your calories. And when I say keep track, I mean diligently. Anything that has calories that you eat or drink needs to go in there. Sodas have calories, they go in. Juices have calories, they go in. If the sauces on your dinner have calories, they go in. If you use a certain amount of oil to fry your food, that should also factor in. The full amount doesn't necessarily make it into the meal, but the calories add up, and you may benefit from simply adding in the full amount as a hedge against slip-ups elsewhere. Now, remember back in part 1 where we discussed components of calories out, and we talked about things like NEAT and how unexplained factors make a sizable difference in our BMRs? These calculators are really just a starting point. If it gives you a number and you find yourself gaining weight despite being pretty sure you're hitting that number, you're either forgetting to count some calories somewhere, or that calculator has underestimated your BMR because it's going by averages. I'm fortunate enough that these calculators typically get my BMR very close to accurate, but others may not be. You may have to troubleshoot more than I did. Now, if you're already well into the realm of obesity, I don't necessarily think going straight into calorie counting is going to be right for you. I've had enough experiences with patients where I laid all of this out for them and they didn't, or couldn't act on the information. Very possibly because I put too much on them at once. Oftentimes, people who are more obese will subconsciously under-record their intake, and many people, obese or not, will struggle to keep up with the requirements of this kind of strict calorie counting. Some might be intimidated by the numbers and implied math. It's often useful to ease yourself into the idea of being mindful of your diet before really diving into the part where you actively take control. It's a process. So the first thing I always tell people is to start by just making a habit of writing down whatever goes into your mouth that has calories, solid or liquid. Take a few weeks, hell, even a few months, getting it very drilled into your head that whatever you eat will be recorded somewhere, whether that be in an actual physical notebook or in your notes app on your phone. In other words, you start keeping an accurate food journal. At first, I tell people that until they get this habit thoroughly developed and they aren't leaving anything out of the food journal, don't even bother actively changing your diet. Just write down what you're already eating and be as honest as possible. Taking away the pressure of perceived calories can allow you to get a more honest accounting of your caloric intake, but get consistent with it. If you go out to eat, go ahead and do it. Just make it a rule that your journal goes with you, and if it goes in your mouth, it goes in the journal. What you record can be as simple as just a list of foods eaten, how much, and when you eat. And if you're really ambitious and committed, you can even include details like where you're eating, how you feel as you're eating, and what else you're doing while you're eating, like watching TV or something like that. Studies have shown that by simply doing this, food journaling and becoming aware of what you're eating at all times can lead to weight loss even without a more detailed weight loss plan. Once you're an honest, consistent tracker of what you eat, you can really get into taking control. That food journal, by keeping track of what and how much you eat, will allow you to accurately input your calories into something like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer. There's a lot of options to choose from. Chronometer is nice for tracking micronutrients. And from there, you'll be able to see what changes you need to make to hit your calorie goal. If for whatever reason you can't find an app you like, or the apps tend to be too complex for you, you can always revert to old school pen and paper with a calculator. You can literally just look up calorie info either online or on the nutrition facts on containers of what you're eating, and then manually add them up to yield your caloric intake. As far as what to eat as you reach your goal, that can be determined by your health goals and what you prefer. Honestly, you could just keep eating whatever you're eating now and systematically cut off certain servings over time, starting with simple carbohydrates and junk calories like alcoholic beverages. I've met some patients that were able to make visible weight changes just by quitting alcohol. Often, when I see someone who's obese and drinks often, I'll calculate how many calories that adds right in front of them in the office, because those calories should always go first from a health perspective. Simple carbohydrates like those in candies or juices aren't going to satiate you for very long. When they're metabolized and your blood sugar crashes later, it can drive you to eat more later and overall increase your calories in. So I'd cut them out first as well. Things like cola and juice are high-reward, low-hanging fruit, as you never really need them in your diet and they're often calorie-dense. You don't need to hit your daily deficit goal immediately. You could practice getting to a 200-calorie daily deficit for a few weeks before ramping up the deficit to maybe 300 and then later to 400 and 500. It's up to you how you get there, but the deficit is key. A certain amount of hunger will be expected, especially as you maintain a deficit over longer periods. Part of why I almost never recommend going too much over 500 per day is that hunger tends to become a bigger factor as you go over. How does exercise fit into all this? It helps. It's not how you get there, because you can't and shouldn't try to outwork a bad diet model, but it helps. Those extra however many 100 calories you burn working out gives you a bit of a cushion to your deficit in case there's a small slip up once in a while. And exercise has a variety of health benefits on top of that. This isn't the video where I'll go in depth on exercise, but rest assured that one is coming up. One way of helping weight loss along if you start to hit a plateau and you've already restricted your calories adequately or pretty heavily even, and you'd rather not keep cutting food, is to simply work out more. So what do you do when you reach your target weight goal? Well, I wouldn't stop tracking your calories just yet. It often takes months for your body to get used to the idea of being at a certain weight. I'd be good about tracking your diet for at least 6 months after you reach your goal. Seriously, that long. Just because you got to a certain weight and you like the way you look there, doesn't mean your physiology agrees with you just yet. Especially if you started out obese, BMI 30 plus, you probably got there over a prolonged time period and your body is more used to being heavy than it is to being smaller. Your homeostatic set point isn't going to change even after a few months of dieting. Find a target weight and then spend a few months making it your stable weight. Eventually, you'll be more capable of maintaining that weight even without a more intense diet tracking kind of routine. But I'd give it 6 months before you go back to not tracking at all if that's what you want to do. If you ever go back to not tracking at all. I can tell you from personal experience that it can come to be enjoyable, and the feeling of control can make you feel good. These days, I know the nutrition facts of everything I eat and can do the addition in my head as I go. I don't use MyFitnessPal anymore, but I'm never really not tracking anymore. Sometimes, if I change something significantly, I'll use chronometer to get an idea of my micronutrient balance, but most of the time I'm just cruising. Eventually, you'll get familiar enough with your own body and your response to diet and exercise that you'll be able to pick a target weight and take yourself there in a set amount of time, basically at will. Trust me, guys, if you're someone who's struggled with being overweight for a long time, that kind of confidence will feel good and it's worth achieving.